I'm Bret, Lott, and God bless Mike. It was such a great talk. I am going to be totally honest with you. A few years ago, students of mine, I teach at the College of Charleston. I'm a professor at a secular school, been for 30 years. And a few years ago, this phrase started creeping into the classroom. They started saying, "I'm not going to lie." People started saying, "I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie." And to me, I always responded, "Well, were you lying to me all along before this, and now you're going to say this?" But I'm not going to lie to you. I take these presentations very seriously. And I'm a writer. I write things down. I do that. That's what I practice. That's what my volition is. So I have for hours and beat my head up over this talk because this is very important to me. I don't labor in this vineyard. I speak to universities all the time around the world, and I don't very often at all get to speak to fellow believers, which is a glorious thing. And I only have 20 minutes. But I just beat myself up, made a PowerPoint, everything else, and then yesterday afternoon I was up in a room up here and I heard what I believed. I felt the Holy Spirit telling me, "Hey, give it up. Just go out there and talk to them." Because my life is fiction. Don't thank me. But my life is fiction, and then what I realized was I got 20 minutes to say everything about my life. What does fiction have to do with Jesus? And so the answer is everything. Thank you, Portland. Time to go. No. Fiction, Jesus has everything to do with fiction. The Word, before everything was the Word. If you look at the Bible is a compilation of pages that calls for our imagination. There's no tree of life that you open it up and you get, the fold-out pop-up books. I mean, that would be a cool thing, though. A Bible that was a pop-up Bible. It would be very thick. But there's no tree of life, There's no whale that jumps up and there's no cross that pops out. These are words on pages that call for our imagination. Throughout the Bible is nothing but image upon image upon image upon image. That's all that it is. God is the rock. He's the banner. He's everything that you can think of. And that is an employment of our imagination. It's a fiction. It's not a fiction in that it's a lie, but it's an image that calls for our imagination. And fiction is the full employment of our imagination. Christ. Christ, as the old saw, just told story after story after story. He told parables. And they're not true stories. There was no fact checker on Jesus to see that, if there really was a prodigal son. These are stories that he told. They're fictions. He said again and again, he said, the kingdom is like this. The kingdom is like, a guy who goes out and sows wheat and then his enemies come in and put weeds behind him. The kingdom is like a king who's calling to account his people. The kingdom is like a woman who loses one of her 10 coins. The kingdom is like. He keeps saying this again and again and again. Every one of those is a fiction. But they're not a fiction. They're a fiction. Fiction is what tells the truth. So he's actually telling the truth with each of those, but he's making it up. The two stories that I love the most, and everybody knows, are, of course, the prodigal son and as I'm working without my net, the Good Samaritan. Okay. And what I find very interesting about those stories is that implied in the question, what does fiction have to do with Jesus, is the possibility that fiction has nothing to do with Jesus. But it does. It's inherent to it. In the Good Samaritan story, he tells these stories that actually are meant to mangle the listeners. And in our day and age, we oftentimes look to Christian fiction, present company perhaps excluded, to prop us up, to help us out. Christ's stories basically would beat people up. The Good Samaritan would be a story in our telling, would be like somebody that we're looking earnestly to for answers, and he'd tell us a story. We'd ask him, "Who's my neighbor?" And he would say, "Okay, there's a guy out on whatever street out here gets knifed and thrown on the side of the road, and John Piper walks by." Okay? And we've relegated these stories to people in robes and bath towels and things over their head. But the people who are listening to these stories at this time, that's a real guy. The priest is a real guy. I know that guy. Levite's a real guy. So he tells a story and says, John Piper walks by and he's got a gig. He's got to get going. He can't stop and help this guy. And then, the next person is Beth Moore. Or, forgive me, the whole staff at Humble Beast, they got a gig they got to go to. And they walk past. And then the next one is a Muslim who stops and helps the man and goes puts him in the back of his car and takes him to the hospital. That's the impact of those stories. Now, the listeners were actually being beat up over that. What do you mean? John Piper would never walk past these people. But it's true. That's the story that he was telling them. The story of the prodigal son is a story of utmost disaster to people. We, again, think, okay, it's just he used all his money on the prostitutes, ended up feeding pigs. If you know anything at all about the Jews and pigs, this is a really bad thing to have your son end up being. The question about that story, though, was shoot, man, I'm working without a net. The reason he was told that story was, why are you eating with the prostitutes? That's right. See, this is what happens when you work without a net. So, why are you eating with the prostitutes? And he says, well, let me tell you a story about a guy who wasted all his money. Now, the end of that story, which I think makes this story such a beautiful work of art, is that upon examination, there's no resolution to this story. The happy ending is a happy ending for the father and the son, the prodigal son. But the father has to come to the older son, who is me, the listener, who doesn't like what's happening with these people. And the story doesn't have an end. Jesus tells a story that does not end with, and then the older son saw the folly of his ways and joined in the party. That is what I think we think Christian fiction ought to be now. But Christ gets up and tells this story in which he points to the audience and says, what are you going to do? You are the one whose folly you are inhabiting. And so my life in fiction is that I've tried throughout my 14 books to try and address that world that Christ looked at in the integrity of Christ, to try and see how I can tell a story of redemption, but not make it a story that just props you up in your prejudices and presuppositions about the way the world should work as a Christian. I see art as confrontational. It doesn't mean I'm in your face and slapping you around. It means that I'm asking you to think and give pause and ruminate. Too much Christian art, in my opinion, is Christian fiction, is, as I said, it's meant to prop you up and to make you feel better about the world in which you live. But the world that I know is filled with sin. My characters are characters who are fallen. And I inhabit that world with all the books that I write. They're fallen people. They're trying to understand who they are and why and how they can seek redemption. I'm really working without a net here, and I'm asking you to pray for me right now because I'm going in grace. Everybody else has done a really good job, except for me, it seems. But I want to talk a little bit about the impact of fiction, though, too. Fiction has this kind of sense that it's like this little ancillary thing over there that people read novels. You know, when I should be reading nonfiction, I should be reading things that are factual. But I would put before you that fiction has a genuine impact on lives. It has a real impact on lives. And the first thing easiest thing to do would be to look at Comic-Con every year. Comic-Con meets, and the thing that we know about Comic-Con is what? What do we see from Comic-Con? We see people dressed as characters, okay? Those are fictions. These are all fictions. But they'll come and they'll be in the newspaper, and you see that's for a week. You're seeing, what's happening at Comic-Con. Here's these crazy people dressed up like these characters. But you know what? They have identified with these characters. They've found something in these characters that speaks to them personally. And for us to believe that fiction is not impactful, that it's like this little side show that people do for fun, is to vastly, vastly underestimate its power. And I wish that there were like a Bible con. I wish there were a thing where we could dress up. Yeah. I wish there's some characters. One of my favorite characters is a guy named Micaiah. It's in 2nd Chronicles and 2nd Kings, where Ahab and Jehoshaphat, looking at the clock, Ahab and Jehoshaphat, Ahab wants to go take on Ramoth Gilead, and so he calls Jehoshaphat from Judah, and they sit down, and Ahab brings in like 100 prophets, and they all say, hey, yeah, you're going to go out there and you beat them. And then Jehoshaphat says, wait a minute, is this everybody? Is there somebody else? And Ahab says, well, there's this guy named Micaiah. And I never bring him because he's a pain in the butt. He never tells me what I want to hear. And so Jehoshaphat says, bring him in. And Ahab's like, all right. So they send and go get Micaiah. Micaiah comes in. And it's just, to me, it's one of the funnier moments in the Bible. Micaiah comes in and says, and Ahab says, okay, what do you think? Micaiah says, oh, yeah, you're going to win. You're going to do it. And Ahab says, don't pull that on me. Just tell me what you really think. And Micaiah says, you're going to die. So, but that great sense of sarcasm that this guy has. Oh, yeah, you're going to be fine. And Ahab sees right through it. And then there's another character next to him, was Zedekiah, who was one of the guys who's one of the priests. I love the Old Testament. The Old Testament is nothing but wonderful stories. If you love fiction, you love stories, you gotta love the Old Testament. So Zedekiah makes these wrought iron bullhorns, and he's dancing around going, this is what you're gonna do, Ahab, you're gonna beat him. And then Micaiah comes in and tells him the story, and then Zedekiah slaps Micaiah across the face and says, who made you the prophet of this? Why did the Spirit leave me and go to you? And Micaiah says, when you're in a room hiding from people, you're going to find out. So you only just, and the Bible doesn't really explain what happens next to Zedekiah, but I know something bad's going to happen. And then there's my personal hero, Stephen, which the story of Stephen is a guy I'd love to dress up like Stephen. Stephen was this guy who was appointed. What was his job? You guys know Stephen. His job was the disciples were getting too much in the weeds of feeding the widows and everybody, feeding people and doing this stuff. So they took on two people, one of whom was Stephen, to help feed people. So basically he's a waiter, okay? And who's the great first martyr in the Bible is in the New Testament? It's Stephen. Acts chapter 7 is my favorite chapter in the Bible because here's a waiter, okay? This is a waiter. And he's the guy who gives the people in power the whole story of why we're here, how we got to this particular moment. It's an absolutely astonishing thing. But now I'm going to talk to you artists, you creatives. This is a new word in my life, creatives. We used to just call it people who make things. But I'm going to talk kind of finish up with talking about my real hero, which is a guy named Bezalel. I hope you know who Bezalel is. Bezalel is the guy that I know you people heard that. I've heard you. This is good. Is the fellow that God names to Moses as the artisan. He's the guy. It's time to make the tabernacle. It's time to make everything. And he actually names Bezalel by name, and then Aholiab is kind of his second commander, lieutenant. But Bezalel gets in there, and Moses gives him all the plans. And here's the thing, there's these plans that have come from God, but Bezalel's the guy who had to imagine it. He had to see it. He had to make up these things from these plans that Moses has given him, verbal plans, and then from that he creates the ark. He creates the seraphim, and he creates the tapestry. He creates the weaving. He creates the pomegranate bell. He creates all these things by design. He's this true artist in the Old Testament to make the tabernacle of God, where God's name's going to reside. What an honor is that? What an extraordinary honor. But here's what I love about Bezalel most, is that Bezalel is from the tribe of Judah. And what do we know about the tribe of Judah? It ain't Levi. And it's not the priesthood, the royal priesthood. It's not Aaron's family. So you have a man who is an artist who's from the tribe of Judah. And he makes the tabernacle. He makes the Holy of Holies. He makes all the utensils. He makes all of these things with this artistry that God has identified him for. What is his role then with the tabernacle after the tabernacle is built? He has no role. He's not let inside the Holy of Holies. He's not one of the priesthood. That's not his role. He's appointed by God to go out and make these things, make them with the integrity of God, make them with his own vision, with his own design, not God's design, but his own execution of those designs. And then he's asked to recede back into being a part of the nation of Israel, rather than a celebrated guy who gets to stand and wave, shake hands at everybody as they walk into the tabernacle. That's not the role of Bezalel. And I think that the role of we as artists is the same thing. I have been blessed with, I have been to the mountaintop, man. I've been on Oprah. I've been around the world. I have been an international bestseller. I've had movies made of my books. All these things have been blessed, I've been blessed with. And my understanding of that blessing is that I have been blessed to be a blessing. I have not been blessed to be a show horse. I'm not somebody who goes out there and says, hey, look at me. I'm the humblest guy you're ever going to meet. Humility, whenever it's spoken of, is lost. My job is to just simply recede and to make the books that I make and to let the books speak on their own and not to be celebrated and not to celebrate myself. So that's why I love Bezalel the most in the Bible, because he is a guy who gave his life to making this and then stepped aside, and we never hear anything else about Bezalel after Exodus. We hear a little mention of him later on. So as we are trying to think, for my talking about this whole thing is that the question, what does fiction have to do with Jesus? Fiction is our way of understanding God. It's a way of seeing him. It's not to say that God is a fiction, but fiction is the lie that tells the truth. And through fiction, my life as a writer, I've tried to write books that reflect my fabric of being. I don't have, the being a Christian for me is not like an app that I downloaded into my system and then it scans the lines to see if enough Jesus per minute in my work. It's simply who I am as a writer. And so my job as a writer is simply to speak of that fabric, be who I am, be genuine, be real, and not try and be, as we Protestants are, we're basically a utilitarian people. That's why the question is asked, what does fiction have to do with Jesus? A lot of times I've encountered in my life the idea that fiction, if it's not utilitarian, it is of no good. But fiction, because it's made of God, is a good in and of itself. And that good is, as I am created in God's image, and one of God's greatest attributes is that he's a creator. And I see in me, I am a creator, you are a creator. We want to make things. Satan is the destroyer. There is nothing good coming out of destruction. There's only good coming out of making things. And so as I create my books, I'm trying to create back to God what he has given to me, which is redemption and love and mercy, but also a reality of the folly of sin and the depth of that sin. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you guys, and believe me, I was very worked up about this, and I still am, and they'll play this back, and I'll see all these stammers and everything. But it's been a great pleasure to talk to you, and actually, Randy Alcorn is in the house, which is going to be really cool today. But in the meantime, God bless you all, and thank you so much for simply listening to me yammer. Thank you.